Welcome to the e-lecture series conducted under Gyan program, an initiative of the Commissionerate of College Education, Government of Rajasthan. I'm Dr. Kiran, Associate Professor in English. In this session, we are going to talk about a well-known poem where the mind is without fear, composed by the legendary poet Rabindranath Tagore. Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, as we all know him, is a widely acclaimed Bengali polymath, a versatile creative genius, poet, painter, playwright, novelist, a storyteller, and a musician. Above all, a humanist philosopher and a social reformer all in one. This great master of melodies composed the national anthem of India. For the profoundly sensitive and melodious verses, he was awarded with Nobel Prize in 1913 for his work Gitanjali, and he became the first non-European or even the first lyricist to receive this award. We Indians are also grateful to Gurudev Tagore for his greatest gift to the world of academia, that is Vishwa Bharati University, which he founded in 1901 as an ashram to revive the ancient educational traditions of India. Let's have some more information about the life and works of Gurudev Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore was born on 7th May 1861. He died on 7th August 1941. This prolific writer began his journey as a poet at the age of 8, and he published his first poem at the age of 16 under the pseudonym Bhanu Simha, and later on he got published his works with his real name. Tagore went to England in 1878 to study law, but without completing his degree, he left University College London in 1880 and came back to India. And throughout his life, he traveled a lot, and he traveled more than 30 countries and befriended eminent literary figures like W.B. Yeats, Ezra Pound, Robert Frost, H.G. Wells. He met with Albert Einstein and Mussolini too. In 1915, British Crown knighted Tagore, and he returned his knighthood after the Jallianwala Bagh massacre of 1919. Tagore has a rich collection of creative writings to his credit, which include more than 3,000 poems, 2,000 songs, 50 plays, 40 volumes of essays, along with 8 novels and 4 novellas. To name a few, his novels Ghare Baire and Gora, his novella Chokher Bali, the collections of his poems Kabhi Kahani, Prabhat Sangeet, Sandhya Sangeet, and Gitanjali, and among his well-known plays are Valmiki Pratibha and Chandalika. The play Valmiki Pratibha deals with the life of the great sage Valmiki, and the play Chandalika talks about the evils of caste system in Indian society. And another important part of his collection is the short stories. Here I would like to make a special mention of his well-known stories Kabuliwala and Living or Dead. And I hope all of you must be familiar with the profoundly sensitive and moving story of Kabuliwala. The another part of this collection is the songs. He composed more than 2,000 songs, which constitute a distinctive style of music that is known as Rabindra Sangeet. And these songs are part of his novels, his stories, and they have been used in Bengali movies as well. And here I would like to special mention of the song Ekla Chalore, and then the another song Amar Sonar Bangla, which is the national anthem of our neighboring country, Bangladesh. All of Tagore's works, whether his plays or his poems or his novels, they all uh, give expression to his perception of life and literature in East as well as West. His works reflect the influence of Vedantic spiritualism on Tagore's creative talent, and he was greatly influenced by the Advait philosophy of Upanishads. The another important influence on his writings is that of the Bhakti poetry of the sage poets like Kabir. Then the third important influence is that of a Bengali folk tradition of music, popularly known as baul tradition. And last but not the least, in Tagore's writing, Tagore's approach towards life, in Tagore's philosophy, we find that there is a beautiful blend of East and West. And his writings also reflect the influence of his reading of the Western literature, especially the influence of English Romantic movement is visible in his poems and also that of Bible. Let's have a look at the salient features of Tagore's poetry. Students, Tagore's poetry gives expression to his interest in mysticism. That is, he celebrates unity of all creation in his poems. His poetry is the poetry of love. Here we can find the poems celebrating the divine love, the love for God, love for nature, and above all, love for humanity. His poems celebrate beauty, beauty not in terms of the beauty of the natural landscape, but the beauty of heart and mind too. He has written extensively on the themes of love for nation and patriotism. In his poems, we find the celebration of ideals of freedom and cosmopolitanism. And as far as the salient features of the stylistic beauty of his poetry are concerned, his poems are known for their musicality, their lyricism, and a rich and vivid imagery. All these features of his poetry, whether his love for mysticism, celebration of the ideals of love, beauty, freedom, or cosmopolitanism are concerned, they all got reflected in his famous work Gitanjali. Let's have some more information about this great work. Gitanjali is a collection of 150 poems originally written in Bangla. But the English translation of Gitanjali, for which Gurudev Tagore received Nobel Prize, consists of 103 poems. And interestingly, these 103 poems are not all from the original Bangla version of Gitanjali. And there are only 53 from the original Bengali version of Gitanjali, and the 50 poems are from his other collections, other works, some from his drama Achlaitan and some from his collection of poems, especially Gitimalya, Naivedya and Khya. The English translation of Gitanjali was published by Indian Society London with an introduction by an eminent Irish poet, W.B. Yeats. And the poem which we are going to discuss in detail, Where the Mind is Without Fear, is also taken from this English translation of Gitanjali. The poem Where the Mind is Without Fear was originally entitled Prarthana, and it was included in Tagore's poetry collection Nevedh, which was published in 1901, and later on in 1912 it was included by Tagore in his English translation of Gitanjali. And as far as the central idea or the core concern of this poem is concerned, this poem talks about poet's love for India and his vision for India as a haven of freedom. As this poem was written during the days when India was struggling for independence. So the poet is giving expression to his vision of India, that what he wants, what he wishes for his country to be. So this poem is there in the form of a prayer to God, to Almighty, to make his country a haven of freedom, an ideal nation. That is poet's wish, which is reflected in this poem. Now let's have the text of this poem. Here I would like to add that this poem, Where the Mind is Without Fear, is included in some of the anthologies under the title Heaven of Freedom. Because in this poem, the poet is visualizing an ideal state, an ideal nation, which he calls Heaven of Freedom. And what that Heaven of Freedom stands for, which are the qualities which the poet wishes should be there in that Heaven of Freedom, that is the content of this poem. So now let's have the poem. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high. In this opening line of the poem, the poet is talking about two special features of that heaven of freedom which the poet visualizes, which the poet wishes his country to be. That is fearlessness and self-dignity. As in the first part of the line, the poet is saying where the mind is without fear, means in the heaven of freedom, the people will be able to live fearlessly without any fear of physical tyranny or social exploitation. And second part of the line, he says that people will be able to live with their heads high, means people will be able to live with dignity, people will be able to live with pride. So in this first line, the poet is talking about two features, two attributes of the heaven of freedom, and they are fearlessness and self-dignity. In the second line, the poet says, where knowledge is free. Here, the poet is talking about the equal opportunities for education to all in the society without any discrimination on the basis of caste or class. And secondly, he is also talking about freeing education from the formal constraints or the limitations of the formal curriculum. He wishes education or knowledge to be free, to be received from the books of life, from the vast curriculum of life itself. So here the poet is talking about education in the wider context, knowledge in the wider context, knowledge not from the books but from the experiences. In the third line, the poet says, where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls. Here, the poet is visualizing a society which celebrates the ideal of equality, means that very society will not be divided into any groups on the basis of differences between caste, class, or religion. Here, the phrase narrow domestic wall, this narrow domestic wall, this phrase refers to the differences on the basis of caste, class, and religion. So here, the poet is talking about the ideal of equality for the heaven of freedom. That a heaven of freedom can be created if everyone has an equal opportunity. There will be no discrimination, there will be no difference, there will be no conflicts at the social level in that very nation. So here we can say the poet begins with his visualization of the heaven of freedom, which can be created on earth with the right approach or with the ideal approach towards life. And if we talk about the stylistic beauty of these very lines, we can say that in the first line, and the highlighted phrase, head is held high, here the poet has beautifully used alliteration, the how the h sound is alliterated. Then in the last phrase, which is highlighted on your screen, is narrow domestic wall. Here the domestic wall is a metaphor for the disparities and differences on the basis of religion and caste. So we can say in these lines the poet has beautifully used alliteration and metaphor. Now what next the poet says? Where words come out from the depth of truth. Here in this line the poet is talking about belief in truth. He is talking about the ideal of truthfulness in that heaven of freedom. So here the poet is showing his deep respect for the truthfulness, which is the basic requirement to create a heaven on earth. And the next, where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection. How beautifully the poet has given expression to the importance of hard work, the importance of diligence for success. So here the poet is saying, where tireless striving, striving means struggle, constant struggle, tireless without any fatigue, continuously. Stretching means to spread. Arms you all know. So here actually the poet has personified the tireless striving, the constant, continuous struggle, the continuous hard work is personified, and that continuous hard work, that continuous struggle is spreading its arms. It's spreading its arms to what? To catch the perfection, means to reach at the perfection. So the poet has established the importance of hard work, of constant, continuous hard work through this very effective personification, that how the tireless struggle is moving towards perfection to create a beautiful life for people on earth. In the next line, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit. Here, the poet is talking about the importance of reason, the importance of open-mindedness, the importance of a logical approach towards life. He's talking about the importance of getting oneself free from the outdated traditions. And he has given expression to this thought through a very effective metaphor. The poet is comparing reason or the logic or the logical approach towards life with a stream of water, with a clear river. And that clear river of reason, that clear river of logic or logical approach towards life should keep on flowing, and it should not lose its way. And where that stream of reason can lose its way, it can lose its way when it is contaminated by, when it is under the impression of the outdated, illogical dogmas, illogical beliefs, superstitions. So here he says that that very river of reason should not lose its way in the desert sand of outdated habits. In the last highlighted phrase on your screen, the poet is talking about a dreary desert, a very horrible, terrible desert sand, scorching heat of the sand. And that sand is referring to that sand of the desert is referring to the dead habits. Dead habits is the outdated traditions, the dogmas, the narrow beliefs, the illogical beliefs. So here we can say the poet is talking about the power of reason, the power of logical approach towards life, the power of freedom from outdated tradition, the power of freedom from narrow-mindedness. So this is how in these lines the poet is talking about three another important aspects or another features of the heaven of freedom. Number one, truthfulness. Number two, constant continuous hard work. And number three, the freedom from narrow-mindedness or the power of reason. And in the closing part of the poem, the poet says that this is the place where the mind is led forward by thee. Thee is here for God Almighty. The poet is praying to the God that this is the place which enjoys fearlessness, which enjoys truthfulness, which enjoys the power of reason, which enjoys the freedom from differences, which enjoys the freedom from narrow-mindedness. This is the land where he wants God to lead his people into an ever-widening thought and action. Here he is talking about the open world of thoughts and action. Means there will be the narrowness, not there will be no narrowness in the thoughts, in the ideology, in the approach towards life, and there will be no narrowness in the action which will be performed in that very land. And that very land will be the heaven of freedom. So here the poet is to say that the heaven of freedom is not an imaginary idea. We can create a heaven of freedom on earth through our actions and thoughts. And that's what the poet wishes God to awaken his country. That's why the poet is making an appeal, making a plea to God. He said that into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. So here my Father is for God. So the poet is uh, praying to the God, praying to the Creator to awaken his land into that heaven of freedom. So this is how the poet has given expression to his vision of an ideal nation, of an ideal state of life for the people of his country. And by now you have a clear idea that how effectively the poet has given expression to his vision. And if we talk about the structure and style of this poem is written in free verse. Here is a text of the poem on your screen. If you look closely at the text of the poem, you will feel that this poem is written in free verse. There is no specific formal rhyme scheme is followed. And the another important thing is that the poem is written in the form of a single complex sentence. And the unity, the strength of the structure of this poem is given by the run-on enjambment, that how the sense runs from one line to another. So these enjambed lines give strength to the structure of the poem. And the another part, the beauty of this poem, as we have discussed while talking about the text of the poem, that the poet has beautifully used alliteration, personification, and metaphor. Let's recapitulate how these figures of speech are used in this poem. In the first line, that is the phrase highlighted on your screen. It shows the use of alliteration. Then in the second line, the highlighted phrase narrow domestic walls. Here is the effective use of metaphor. The poet is talking about the walls of differences, the walls of divisions, the walls of social barriers. Then in the third line, the highlighted phrase tireless striving stretches its arms. It here is the use of personification. The poet has personified the constant struggle, the constant hard work, which is moving towards perfection. And in the third line, there are two highlighted phrases. Next line, and two highlighted phrases: the clear stream of reason and the dreary desert sand of dead habits. This is also a very beautiful and effective use of metaphor. The poet is talking about the river of reason, the river of logical approach towards life, which should keep on flowing. And then the another part, he's talking about the dreary desert sand of dead habit. He is talking about the uh, sand of the outdated beliefs, the narrow beliefs, the dogmas, the superstitions, that the logical approach towards life should not get disoriented, should not get lost its way in the under the influence of superstitions or the outdated traditions. And in the last highlighted phrase is the central metaphor of the poem, that is heaven of freedom. So the poet is to say that this heaven is not something which is not accessible to we human beings. We human beings can also create heaven on earth with our deeds, with our actions, with our thoughts, and with our belief in God, because only God can empower us, God can strengthen us to have that much fearlessness, that much truthfulness, that much devotion, submission, that much uh, positive spirit to create heaven on earth. And that heaven on earth will be the heaven of freedom. And lastly, here I would like to say that overall, the mood of the poet is reflective. He is just contemplating over the state of an ideal nation which he wishes for his country, and he has very beautifully given expression to his vision of India. So this is all about this very powerful patriotic lyric, where the poet is praying to God to make his country a heaven of freedom. And through a series of statements in this poem, the poet has given expression to the special attributes which he assigns to that heaven of freedom, which he wishes for his nation. Thank you.